we have to just acknowledge that until someone creates the ability for us to just, endlessly live in our current state, we are all going to face our eventual demise, right? And so, how do we address the taboos that there are around talking about death and money?
I think a universal approach is that you're not coming at it from a place of wanting to guilt someone. I think
Mm.
you're wanting to approach it from a perspective of I care about you and I want to honor your intentions when you're no longer here.
Alejandra, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you here to talk about a topic that I feel like is so incredibly important, but so intimidating for many people in the personal finance space, which is estate planning, because nobody wants to acknowledge the fact that one day all this wealth and this incredible work that you're doing, it's going to have to be left to somebody else. And hopefully you think about that before it gets too late. And that's why I'm so excited for the work that you and that your colleagues over at Trust and Will do, because if there's one area I think of this money conversation that feels like super gate kept up until recently, it is this world. It feels, almost like a conversation that other people have had for a long time, but I think more of us need to have, and super excited to talk about that here today with you. So welcome to Yo Quiero Dinero.
I'm super excited to be here. Sort of what we were talking about in the lead up to today's session. I have so much passion for this topic, mostly
Mm,
because of my own family background coming into this, but also because it's a conversation that I feel like almost regardless of your cultural background, people just don't want to talk about it. There's something about our own very natural but impending doom at some point in our life that people are like, I don't want to talk about that right now, but we should because it's
yeah,
important. It's
it is.
important not just for our loved ones, but it's also just a part of your complete life picture.
Yeah, absolutely. If we're going to do all this work to, buy homes and build businesses and build wealth, we also want to make sure that we're being good stewards of it, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. Because then what the hell was the point, if you ask me, right? So, first, let's talk about your backstory, because you have a very unique connection to wanting to be in this space. So, tell us about your career path and kind of what led you to become the head of legal over at Trust and Will.
Thank you so much for this. So, we're going to go back in time to the time machine to 9/11. No one thought that this podcast was going to be talking about 9/11, but here we go. So, uh, during that period of time, my dad had decided that he was going to go back to Chile, where I'm from, to start up a new business there. And he was flying back and forth between Chile and the United States for his business. And when 9/11 happened, my sister and I said to my dad, hey, listen, like, you need to have a plan. Like, you need to figure out what happens because, you were very lucky that nothing happened to you on that day. So we frog marched our Latino dad into a lawyer's office in Alameda, California, and put together an estate plan. And both my sister and I, we thought, okay, well, we're done, right? Like, we've done our not our civic duty, but we've done our family duty and making sure that, like, he has a plan and is giving us instructions about what he wants us to do when and if it happened. And for us, it was never about like, oh, let's make sure that we get our grubby hands on, our dad's things. It was about like, we want to follow your instructions. Please leave us some instructions. Now, what we didn't anticipate happening was that our dad was going to eventually move back to Chile and that our beautiful estate plan that we had asked him to put together was going to be completely not valid in Chile. So, for all intents and purposes, our father passed away without a plan. And then it was really my sister and I figuring out, well, what would he have wanted? And that's part of the reason why I have so much heart and I'm so thrilled to be talking to you about this is because, our family didn't come from a lot of money, but my dad had a house, he had a checking account, a savings account, and then on top of that, his business was still going, right? His business was still going. And so then I had to step in to run my father's business for a period of time, all without any instructions, not that an estate plan would have given me instructions on how my dad wanted his business run, but I feel like I could have interpreted from the estate plan
Yeah.
what he would have wanted.
Right.
And there was nothing. So
Oh man. Okay. So much to dive into. For the first thing that jumps out at me is just like the importance of having the conversation, right? Like what before we even talk about the logistics around creating an estate plan, like we have to just acknowledge that until someone creates the ability for us to just, endlessly live in our current state, we are all going to face our eventual demise, right? And so, even a simple conversation with your dad around, like, hey, what's the plan for the business? Like, do you want to sell it? Is there a business succession plan? Like, what are we doing? I think it's just hard for people to bring up. And then, especially, I think there are a lot of cultural taboos around this topic in the Latino community. So, obviously, as someone of the community, like, what do you think plays into that? And how do we address the taboos that there are around talking about death and money?
I love this question. I think some of it is a personal conversation between you and your loved ones and figuring out the right way to go into it. But I think a universal approach is that you're not coming at it from a place of wanting to guilt someone. I think
Mm,
you're wanting to approach it from a perspective of, I care about you and I want to honor your intentions when you're no longer here.
yeah.
Because I think a lot of times, and I'm just speaking for myself, like so much of this is wrapped up in, my dad almost being a little bit Peter Pan, right? Like my dad had so much energy. He had like the energy of my sister and I times the Energizer bunny divided by nothing, right? And so I think some of it for him was just like, oh, I've got time for that. And I think one of the things that I would share from this experience is this isn't about your parents' death coming in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months. It's about handling it now for peace of mind. And I think coming into the conversation with, this isn't about me thinking that you're going to pass anytime soon. This is about handling it now so that you don't have to worry about it later. And I
Yeah.
think going into the conversation with, you know, honoring our parents and at the same time honoring their life and that this is about their legacy, I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And you're totally right. So many of us have this, perception that we have time to get to it later, right? Like life is lifing, as they say. But I personally have had friends who have passed away in their 30s and 40s. So it's just like we really don't have any guarantee of having time to take care of this later. And I've kind of had that front row seat to what that experience looks like when the conversations haven't been had and when the paperwork hasn't been done. And it's like on top of all of the grief that comes from losing a loved one, now you got to go deal with all of the financial drama that we could really just skip over if we took some time to plan for this stuff. So I think it's just, I can't drive home the importance of it. And just like, now is the time, y'all. If you're listening to this episode, please go and check out trustandwill.com. Like, what I love about what you guys are doing is just breaking down all of the traditional barriers that have existed to the estate planning process, right? So let's talk about that. For somebody who's never done this before, where should they start? Like, is there some information we should gather to prepare for this stuff? Like, who should we be looping into this conversation? Like, how do we make sure that we're doing this correctly starting on day one?
I love this question. And for our dear listeners, my goal in this podcast is that all of you will go out and start to figure out your estate plan, whether that's with Trust and Will or a different provider. I just want you to start. The nice thing about Trust and Will is that we guide you through that whole process. When you start, we will give you a list of things that you need to think about. There's tons of informational articles on the website about things to think about, in particular, whether you're doing a trust, like here's some things to think about in terms of putting your house in a trust and reasons why you would want to do that, things to think about when you're putting together your will. All of that information is provided for you, and not just provided for the universal you, but also provided for different sorts of people who might have different family situations, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have both a singles product as well as a family product, and both of those entry points will guide you through different questions based off of your life experience.
That's great. What is an estate, Alex? Because I think oftentimes people are like, "Well, do I really need to be thinking about this? Like, do I even have an estate?" So, like, how do we define that?
I know estate makes it sound like we're all like drinking tea in the English countryside with the
Yeah, it's
pinkies
like
up,
pinkies
right?
up, y'all. Like, what the
No,
hell?
just think about estate as like my things,
Uh huh.
right? Think about an estate plan as this is the plan for my things, right? And whether you have a home or a china collection, those are all things that go into what we're calling your estate plan, what you and I are calling my things.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Okay.
helpful?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely helpful. So if you've identified that you have an estate, what's the difference between a will and a trust, and like, how do we know which one we need?
So I recommend that people have both. So
Mm-hmm.
why do I recommend that? If you have a will, for the most part, you will have to go through the probate process. That just happens. Even if you have a legally recognized, done, like notarized and all this, it's still going to have to go through the probate process, which can take a lot of time, right? Where the court is making sure, yes, and money. But if you have a trust, that are in a trust do not go through the probate process for the most part. Obviously, if there's a fight about your trust, that's a whole separate topic, but for the most
Mm-hmm.
part, that will not happen there. So for my personal situation, like my house is in the name of the Sepulveda Morgan Trust.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so that, we only have one daughter, but that's so that, when and if the time comes, she has it's very clear that the house is in the trust. The trust goes to her when she reaches the age, the assets in the trust go to her when she reaches the age of maturity. We
Mm-hmm.
do have, before her age of maturity, we do have someone else who's in charge of the trust and in charge of her, but that is the starting place, is really making sure that you're avoiding the probate process. Now, there might be folks listening to this that are like, oh, probate isn't that bad. But again, coming from my own personal experience of dealing with this in a different country,
Mm.
uh, it did take time. And I was still working full time. I was trying to sort all that out. Layer on top of that, you going through the grief process of having just lost your person, and then you sort
Right.
of get jammed right into this sort of legally intensive process. It's just not something that I would want my family to have to live through.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes so much sense. And I think it's important to just understand the differences between the two. And so, you know, I think what I have come to understand about the trust versus the will is that your trust is how you can facilitate like very easy, quick transfer of um, assets, and you keep it off of public record, right? So there's some benefits to that. Basically, you can protect your loved ones from people knowing that maybe they just inherited like a multi-million-dollar estate, because some stuff can come with that. Some people
Sure.
can come out the woodworks. You hear those stories about like folks who find themselves newly wealthy, and things can get a little weird. So that is one great way to protect your loved ones. And then the will kind of functions as a catch-all for anything that is not part of your trust, right? So things that you can't necessarily um, designate like with a beneficiary in the traditional sense, you can use your will to like pass on abuelita's like pearl necklace or the artwork in her house or things like that. So that's kind of how they function together. um what about like when do we do this, right? Like at what life stages or what milestones should people be thinking about either creating or even updating their estate plan, right? Because I've heard some stories too where it's like you create an estate plan and then next thing you know, the ex-husband that you've been divorced from for 20 years is getting all the money because you did it, but you didn't update it.
I love this question. So let's separate out like when you should do it from when you should update it. So when you should do it. If you had asked me this question before my husband and I had our 7-year-old daughter, I'd be like, that's like down the road.
Yeah.
But I actually passed away I had some pretty severe complications with our daughter, and I passed away, and they didn't know if I was going to make it. So they did CPR on me for a long time, and it was not clear that I was going to make it through. So,
Oh my God.
not that we want the podcast to take a left turn
No,
here,
but that's
but
exactly one of those things that you just can't predict is going to happen.
I was a very healthy woman in my 30s. There was nothing in my medical records that would have indicated that anything like that was going to happen to me.
Wow.
Blood clots got cut loose, got stuck in my lungs. When things get stuck in your lungs, you don't breathe, and it happened. So
Wow.
I think these are things that it can happen at any time. And again, not that we want people to be like, oh, Lord, I'm going to die tomorrow. I better get my estate plan in place. But you don't know.
No, we really
Tomorrow
don't.
is not promised to any of us, right? And if you think about the period of time that it's going to take you to get on, whether it's trust and will or the platform of your choice to go in and put together an estate plan, it's not the process of putting together the documents that takes time. It's you kind of having to think, what do I want to have happen?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a ton of great information on trust and will about giving you some guidance on how to think through these things. And there's just some decisions to be made. For example, if you have young children, there's some decisions to be made as to like, who do you want to have be in charge of those
Mm-hmm.
children, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that's going to take you time, not actually typing in, I want Senora Torres to take care of my daughter Jackson, right? That's not
Yeah.
the time consuming thing. Is that
That's so
helpful?
true. No, that makes so much sense, right? It is again back to those conversations, right? Because we don't know what our loved ones' wishes are if we don't have the conversation. So unfortunately, it has to be something that we kind of reframe, right? So let's talk about how can we kind of shift that narrative so that estate planning feels more empowering than terrifying.
I love that. I think the conversation is really around your legacy.
Mm,
This is your legacy. And as you know, for Latinos, we take so much pride in where we've come from and our ancestors. And I think if we can ground the conversation in this is about honoring our family legacy, I think it shifts the emotional tone of it, right?
yeah.
Because then it's less about like, no me dejes un lío cuando te mueres, don't leave me a mess when you pass away. It's
Yeah.
less about that. And it's more about like, mom, dad, I want to honor all the hard work that you guys have put into this life. And that comes with having a plan for what happens when you're no longer here.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to kind of reframe it so that you are not looking at it as something to dread, but actually something to really want to spearhead in your family so that you can, become the example of wanting to preserve that legacy.
And I think if that doesn't work for whatever reason with, you having a conversation with your parents or your sort of further on in life loved ones, you can be the example yourself, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that, you and I talked about briefly during this podcast already is, this thought that like estate planning is only for people who have all of the things. It
Hmm.
isn't, it's for everyone. And so
Yeah.
I think if you can at least say, all right, like I get it, you don't want to, have this conversation right now. I'm going to put together my estate plan. Can I go through it with you when I'm done? That can be a different way of opening the door to the conversation.
Absolutely. So, as you know, we talk about money and generational wealth on this podcast quite a bit. What role do you think estate planning has in closing that wealth gap? Because I know some of the stats can be quite startling. One of the recent ones I saw is that Black and brown families inherit about a tenth of the wealth that white families do in America. So it's like there's definitely work to be done. But I think, part of what your company is doing is really making things way more accessible.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, again, if we ground the conversation and this is about honoring our parents and our loved ones' hard work, if we start from that place, then you can have the follow on conversation about, like, mom and dad or tia, tío, whoever, you all worked so hard for the things that you got. This is a part of your legacy, right?
Hmm.
We know that so many people do not have an estate plan. And I think one of the reasons for that is they don't understand the process that comes into the machinery, right? The machinery that comes into what happens when someone passes away without an estate plan. And I think that educational point about this is also about setting up your family for the future, I think that can really resonate with people.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk more about the kind of details of the Trust and Will platform. So, what is it that makes it way more accessible versus like traditional methods?
So I should not confess this as being a lawyer, but I got very lucky that, because I'm in the legal community, I got a number of different referrals from people saying, "Hey, I use this person myself for my estate plan." But even through that, like, I'm a lawyer. I literally went to law school, and at that point I had like 15 years of legal experience under my belt, and I was like, I don't understand what's happening here, but you, estate planning lady lawyer, like, you do great. I will listen to. People always think that like lawyers are the worst clients. We're not. We're like, you know what you're doing? Great. Go
Right.
do it. However, we were in a position to actually have the funds to do that. Not everyone does,
Yeah.
right? And so I think if you have a pretty simple estate plan, you have a house, some bank accounts, you can come to Trust and Will and start to figure out, like, what do I want to do? And it's a very easy place to start, because
Hmm.
Trust and Will guide you through all of the questions that you will need to answer to generate your estate plan.
Okay, that's great. I love how technology is really like changing the way that we approach so many aspects of our financial lives, including legacy planning. So that's great to know. There are quite a number of entrepreneurs that listen to the show. There's folks who invest in weird stuff like crypto. Like how complex can your estate be to still be able to use trust and will for your purposes?
Yeah, I love this question. I think one of the things that we offer through Trust and Will is you can have a consultation with one of our estate planning attorneys. And so if you feel like you might have some things that maybe would fall outside of what people understand to be involved in a more traditional estate plan, you can consult with an attorney who can give you advice as to like how you should leave those things, right? Like,
Hmm.
let's say that it's crypto. They might advise you like, hey, you should execute a transfer of the ownership of the crypto to be in the name of your trust, so that again you're bypassing uh, probate as much as you can once you pass away.
Hmm. Okay, that's great to know. And another thing too, there is a lot of different family structures, right? So blended families, folks that are living together that are unmarried, or just other non-traditional households. Should they be approaching estate planning differently or not?
I love this question, and I think this is where having that attorney consultation on the platform is really key.
Yeah.
Fun fact: I did not want to get married. And so the first version of my husband and my estate plan before we got married was just that. It was us sort of figuring out, as two people who were not legally married at the time, like, how do we put together an estate plan that has as much protection in it as people who are legally married kind of automatically get by their state laws.
Yeah.
And I do think that it is definitely something that you will want to have an attorney consultation about, because you almost have to build more scaffolding to make sure that things go where you want them to do. And
Yeah.
that's where having that consultation with that attorney can be really helpful, right? Like,
Hmm.
you can still do the things where you can still have a joint trust, put, your home, your joint home in the name of the trust and that sort of thing. There's just some additional complexity to that you'll definitely want to discuss with someone.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And especially if you find yourself in a similar situation where maybe your family has assets outside of the country, which many folks do. I personally have assets in different locales. And so I've had to think about how do I plan for that on top of the stuff that I have going on here. I'm an author, so I have like royalty, and all kinds of weird stuff going on. So things can get very complex, but I think it's so important to like have this foundational stuff too, right? Because you can always add on to it, but um, I think everybody needs to be having this conversation. And as far as updating your estate plan, I know we talked briefly about this, but I would just want to highlight for folks like, you're changing marital status, if you have kids, if you go from like self-employed to traditional employment or vice versa. You open some new investment accounts, you buy some new real estate. Like anytime you're doing something that has like that could qualify as a life change, I think that's a good time for you to be just at least looking at this. Is it still relevant? And not just that. Sometimes the people that we trust now might not be the same people that we trust in the future. So like having a kind of like a, regular reassessment of like, is this still the person that I would trust to want to like execute my estate wishes? Like, is this still somebody I trust with my finances or with my even things like your healthcare directive and stuff like that. So I like to at least put like an annual reminder of just like, let's go and look and see if this is still relevant. Would you agree?
I think what's that there's a quote from some movie that says, life changes fast, you better keep up. One of the things that I really appreciate about Trust and Will is that monthly membership, because sometimes things
Mm.
really do change that quickly. And the
Hmm.
ability to go in and to make changes to your estate plan and know that it's already covered under the monthly fee. Uh, when my husband and I went in to go make our estate plan and then we wanted to make some changes to it, like, we both make pretty okay money, but, living in the Bay Area at the time in particular, it's not like we're like flush with cash at all points in time. And like, just, I appreciate that lawyers are business people as well. But I think that sticker shock
Mm.
of needing to pay for another couple billable hours, and in particular if you're going to someone who knows what they're doing,
Right.
like how many people just have a couple grand laying around to pay for that attorney to make updates? And that's one of the things that I cannot say enough good things about our membership, is the ability to just know that for like a low price you can come in, you can make edits. We're always adding in additional value to the membership as well, so that it isn't just about wanting to make changes. So
Hmm.
I think having a check-in for yourself almost mentally of like, hey, listen, like I've changed jobs and now I've gotten new stock options as a part of this job. Like, let me make sure that my stock options are accounted for.
Hmm.
Or we've moved houses. Like, let me make sure that that's accounted for. I think just knowing that you can go in and easily make edits is really important. So I think
Yeah.
it's about, if you don't have an estate planning product that allows you to make those changes pretty frequently, then I think it's also just a mental reminder to yourself of like, hey, anytime that I have a big life change, I got to update my estate plan.
Yeah, that's great to know, and it's available digitally, right?
Right.
So, like, if you're not the type of person that loves having a file cabinet full of stuff, and then you're like, "Where the hell's our estate plan?" All you got to do is log into the Trust and Will platform, and there it is, right? So,
There it
there's
is.
something to be said about that of just being able to access it from anywhere, because again, you never know when you're going to need it. So, having that is really key. Let's talk about the enforceability of this, right? Because some people can see like, oh, this is like some app or some website. Like, is this actually a legally enforceable estate plan? And also, is it can anybody in all 50 states create an estate plan that is legally enforceable?
So on Trust and Will, anyone in the United States can create a legally enforceable estate plan.
Okay.
Now, each state has their own particular bugaboos about how they want it executed, the format of that. And that is something that Trust and Will, that's one of the nice things about people coming to Trust and Will, is that that's a responsibility that we take on, is making sure
Hmm.
that our estate planning documents are kept up to date as the laws do change, and
Agree.
as more and more states allow for electronic execution of estate plans. Now, not all states have gotten hip to people don't like paper anymore.
Hmm.
But it is something that we at Trust and Will continue to prioritize in terms of getting legislation passed in all the states to make sure that things are as convenient as possible for people when it comes to wanting to execute their estate planning documents.
Mm.
So that is all guidance that we have for you on the website. We will clearly indicate to you like when it is something that you can do completely online, when it's something that needs to be notarized. We also help you with the notarization process. We partner with notaries in all 50 states. There's options. People can also go to their banks for the most part to get their documents notarized, but
Yeah,
we provide you that guidance all on the platform.
that's incredible. All right, so I'm curious, what is on the horizon for Trusted Will as far as expanding services or reaching more communities?
I think the thing that I am most excited about is something that I can't talk about right now, but
Okay.
um, in that same vein of wanting for things to be easier for people when it comes to what happens after you pass away, we have some incredibly exciting new product updates coming, and I would love for people to just keep on checking the website, because I can't tell you today, but it's coming really soon.
Oh, that's exciting. So I'm going to encourage you guys to go into the show notes and make sure that you're following Trust and Will on your favorite social media platform so that you can stay in touch and find out more about what it's like to work with them. Where can listeners learn more about getting started, or access like any special resources that you guys have through your platform.
I love that. Come to Trust and Will. There's an entire section on our blog going through all sorts of different topics, like, what happens if I have children from a previous marriage? What happens if I want something different than what my spouse wants? There's tons of great resources on there for people to review.
Mm. I am loving the work that you're doing. I love me a combination of finance and tech. It's kind of like my love language. And so what you guys are doing on the Trust and Will platform is just really incredible. And, as someone who really is passionate about creating more accessible resources in the money world, the work that you guys are doing is just really, really invaluable. So I want to thank you for being here, Alex. Thank the entire Trusted Will team on my behalf and on behalf of the audience. And if you guys want to find out more, check out trustandwill.com. I'll link all of the resources that we talked about in the episode show notes. And if you end up using the platform, please send me a DM. I would love to hear your personal story so that we can actually, spread the word, right? So much of what we do here is grassroots, and this platform has become a very trusted resource for a lot of people. And so they already know whenever I'm bringing somebody on here that represents a company, it's because they're doing good work. All right. So thank you for the work that you're doing, Alex. And y'all, get your estate plan together, okay? Because we can't be out here building wealth and just letting it, you know, dissipate into thin air. We are out here building multi-generational wealth that is going to transform not only our lives, but the future as well.
Estate planning is for everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.